This feels like it should be a Babylon Bee headline, like parodying, like wokeness and gender ideology taken to its extreme, but not something, even the crazy activists would actually do. But no, this is the state of modern America. Radical trans activism is actually endangering women now, a new series on how queer our planet supposedly is, and I react to cringe LGBT TikToks. All that and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Damage Control podcast, where we are reclaiming the debate over LGBT issues from the crazy people who've taken it over. I'm Brad Polumbo, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing and sticking around. And don't forget to hit that like button as we go along, and do consider leaving a comment. I do read the comments, and I want to hear from you. Up first, we've got to talk about this story that's just genuinely crazy. I struggled to come up with words to honestly describe the craziness that we have to discuss. So one of President Biden's judicial nominees was testifying before the Senate, and Republican senators ended up grilling her about the fact that while she was a magistrate, she recommended that a male inmate who had committed multiple sex crimes be placed into a female prison. As you can imagine, quite understandably so, some Republican senators, including Senator John Kennedy, the colorful character from Louisiana, had an issue with this. Here's a clip from a recent Senate Judiciary Committee hearing featuring Sarah Netburn, who's nominated by President Biden to be a U.S. District Court judge for the Southern District of New York. Now, apologies for playing such a long clip, but I wanted you to have the full context of this conversation that, of course, went super viral, was covered across Fox News and right-wing media, so that we could talk about it.
Judge Netburn, I was looking at your resume. You went to Brown University, is that right?
I did.
And then you went to law school in California?
That's correct.
And you've worked for the Brennan Center?
I interned. I was a law student intern.
Okay. And you worked for the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy?
I was a law student intern there for 8 weeks during my 1L summer.
Okay. And you are a political activist, aren't you?
I am not. I'm a sitting United States magistrate judge.
Okay. All right. Do you remember an inmate named William McLean, also known as July Justine Shelby?
Yes, I know who you're referring to.
Okay. Mr. McLean, child, didn't he?
30 years ago, the petitioner in the habeas case before me,
Did he rape?
he pled guilty to that crime. Yes, it's abhorrent.
And then he raped a 17, he raped a little boy, right?
I believe that's correct. I believe he pled guilty to two acts of sexual violence.
And then he raped a 17-year-old girl, right?
Again, this case was handled by the state court in Indiana, but
I'm just asking you the facts. Don't stall on me now. Did he rape a 17-year-old girl or not after a 9-year-old boy?
I believe that's what he pled guilty to.
Okay, and then he went to prison, didn't he?
Yes, the petitioner
And then he came out and he sent child, basically adults, little children, to another sex offender. And he was sent back to prison, right?
The petitioner pled guilty to
Was he sent back to prison?
Well, that case was in the federal system, so...
Was he sent back to prison?
Yes, this time to federal prison.
Thank you. And then he decided to transition, and he became a female and started going by July Justine Shelby. Is that right?
Yes.
And Ms. Shelby said, I don't want to go to a male prison. I want to go to a female prison. And the Board of Prisons said, what planet did you parachute in from? You're going to a male prison with this kind of record. And you sent him to a female prison, didn't you? You said that the Board of Prisons was trying to violate Ms. Shelby, former Mr. McLean's constitutional rights, didn't you?
I issued a report and recommendation to the district judge recommending that the district judge transfer the petitioner to a women's facility. The district judge adopted that recommendation.
The Board of Prisons was trying to violate Ms. Shelby's, Mr. McLean's constitutional rights, didn't you?
So I based my decision on the facts that were presented to me in the record
But
evidence.
it wasn't that your ruling?
I recommended finding that under Estelle versus Gamble.
Why won't you admit that was your ruling? Are you ashamed of it today?
I'm not. I'm answering the question. I applied Estelle versus
But
Gamble.
was that your ruling?
My recommendation was that the petitioner's serious medical needs were being denied by keeping her in a men's facility.
A violation of the Eighth Amendment, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And how big was Ms. Shelby, Mr. McLean?
I don't have a specific recollection. Your colleague just suggested that she was
was
more than
6'2"?
6 feet tall.
And you told the Board of Prisons, well, she'll be okay. The other women in the female prison will be okay because it's only hypothetical that Ms. Shelby, Mr. McLean would reoffend again after he's already a 9-year-old boy and a 17-year-old girl and has been sending child to the mail. You said there's no chance he'll reoffend again. Did you say that?
Senator Kennedy, I based my decision on the record
But am I
evidence.
right? Did you conclude that?
I don't have a specific recollection of that. I did recommend that after finding a constitutional violation.
What were you thinking in saying it's only hypothetical that she would reoffend?
The facts of the case were that the petitioner had last engaged in a contact offense 30 years ago. The petitioner had not engaged in any contact offense. In addition, the medical evidence made clear that for the last 5 years, the petitioner was sober and hormonally entirely a female, and there was no evidence.
The Board of Prisons didn't agree with you. I'm not going to run out of time here. You're really a political activist, aren't you?
I am not, sir.
But your record demonstrates otherwise.
I disagree. I apply the law to the facts and come to a fair decision. All of my decisions that have been appealed, particularly this one, the district judge adopted my report and recommendation in full, and the government did not move for a stay of the decision.
There are some nuances to this subject that I will get into, but I just have to say, the idea that anybody with an ounce of common sense would ever think that a biologically male sex offender should be placed into women's prisons genuinely boggles my mind. I did look into it, and while we don't really have good data, it doesn't appear that this practice is very common in the United States, at least not yet. But overseas, in the United Kingdom and in other parts of Europe, we actually have seen this implemented at a much higher rate of frequency. This is just so concerning because while sometimes these concerns are overblown or exaggerated, right, when we talk about like bathrooms, for example, there is no epidemic of transgender people assaulting women in bathrooms. But in this case, and on this issue, radical trans activism is literally endangering women's safety. So-called progressive feminists have actually twisted themselves into a brain knot to the point where they're putting male sex offenders in prisons where they have access to tons of vulnerable women. This is just insane, in part because there is research showing that transgender women who are biologically male still retain patterns of male criminality. I cannot imagine, guys, a better way to take LGBT acceptance and literally torch it, incinerate it, send it up in smoke, than to tie the everyday acceptance of gay and transgender people to the absurd notion that male sex offenders should be put in women's prisons. If you want a complete and total rejection of all things LGBT, keep it up, Democrats, keep it up. I do want to acknowledge some nuances because I do think when it comes to prisons, it is not as simple as let's have one prison for the biological males and one prison for the biological females. Because if you have a transgender woman, for example, who hasn't committed any violent crimes but is in prison for some nonviolent offense and identified as transgender for many years before being convicted. Because another problem is sometimes they suddenly decide they're transgender once they're already in jail or once they're about to be headed to jail, which is deeply suspicious. But if you have a transgender woman who actually has fully transitioned, who didn't commit any violent crimes, and who has been transgender for a very long time, I'm just going to be honest, and we're going to have to bleep this out, but you can imagine what would happen to such a person if they're put into a male prison. They'll be raped over and over and over again. And no matter what crime they've committed, but especially not if it's some nonviolent offense, nobody was sentenced to repeated sexual abuse, and that's a violation of their human rights. So maybe for those individuals, it might make sense to place them in a women's prison. But I do understand the concern that women would have about that as well. One possible solution for this, suggested by my friend Blair White, is the notion of LGBT wards, having a separate section where you could place some of these inmates where they'd be around other people who are like them, and you could kind of sidestep this thorny issue. Of course, even that accommodation would probably be unacceptable to woke activists who'd compare it to segregation or something, but I think it's at least worth exploring as an alternative. But when it comes to male sex offenders who are trans women, I highly doubt that they actually are, but they say they are at least, I don't care. Women's rights and women's safety absolutely must be the priority. They must stay in the male prison. Now, maybe we need to put them in solitary confinement or something, or a separate ward, because I still don't think they should be abused either. But their rights are not the priority in that case. A sex offender's rights are not more important than women's rights to safety in prison. I'm having a hard time even wrapping my head around the idea that we're seriously discussing this as some sort of live debate, or that this is an actual thing that has happened in the United States of America, that our legal system has put male sex offenders into women's prisons. This feels like it should be a Babylon Bee headline, like parodying like wokeness and gender ideology taken to its extreme, but not something, even the crazy activists would actually do. But no, this is the state of modern America, guys. It's really concerning to me, and we've got to get this under control, this community and this agenda, because it's just gone so far extreme. And this kind of thing just strikes the average person as so deeply illogical and so deeply irrational and dangerous, guys. Genuinely dangerous. That's not hyperbole in this instance. If we don't put a stop to this kind of thing happening and being done in our name, progress for the LGBT community and acceptance for us will plummet. And frankly, we'll have ourselves partially to blame for that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Can you even believe we're discussing this? That this is actually a thing? I'm still somewhat shell-shocked by it, honestly. Up next, are we living in a queer planet? That's what a new Peacock series produced by NBC wants us to believe. Let's take a look at the trailer.
The paparazzi really are everywhere.
Everything you were taught as a kid is wrong.
You make me wanna dance. Gay penguins, bisexual lions, sex-changing clownfish.
This is a queer planet.
Queerness has always existed. It's only in humans that we have such a stigma about it.
The idea of just having two fixed sexes is clearly out of style.
Mother Nature is pretty open-minded. Sex is not just for reproduction.
It's clear that no matter where you look on our planet, nature is full of queer surprises.
To be honest, we should all probably get laid a little more than we do.
Alright, so unfortunately, some right-wing people were very triggered by this online, and I don't think it's worth getting that upset over. At the same time, I do think it's remarkably silly, at least based on the trailer. I guess I'll have to wait to see the full thing, but I can draw some conclusions so far, and it looks kind of silly to me. I do want to acknowledge the grain of truth to this. Homosexuality, or what they call queerness, which I don't like, but that's a whole nother can of worms, absolutely has been observed in many species of animals for a long time. But by citing that to promote LGBT acceptance among people, they're actually making one of the same logical mistakes that anti-gay conservatives often do. They're engaging in something called the naturalist fallacy, which suggests that if something is natural, it's good, and if something is unnatural, it's bad. This is why an anti-gay conservative, for example, would talk about gays being unnatural as part of their push against being gay. And what these LGBT promoters seem to be doing is saying actually being gay is natural, so therefore it is good. In both cases, they're making the same incredibly flawed argument. Because natural versus unnatural is a morally neutral qualifier. There's no reality to the notion that something being natural means it's moral, or something being unnatural means it's immoral. For example, hurricanes, earthquakes, plagues, all these things are natural. Whereas life-saving modern medical technology, the polio vaccine, all these things are unnatural. Death and aging are natural, but contact lenses and cochlear implants that help you hear if you're deaf are unnatural. Natural is good doesn't make any sense, and it never has. So it's very silly to me to see these LGBT activists embracing the same failed logic that they've tried to rebut against for so long, but actually try to turn it into their favor. Like, no, babe, you've got this backwards. You should be rejecting the premise. Homosexuality or being gay is fine and morally acceptable because there are no victims. It hurts no one. Not because animals sometimes do it. Animals also kill each other, engage in cannibalism in some species. Doesn't mean that's good or something humans should do. The other piece of this that annoyed me was kind of these apples to oranges comparisons, like saying that the idea of only two sexes is absurd because clownfish can change sex. Okay, humans aren't clownfish. There are only two sexes in humans, and then extremely rare genetic conditions where sex is indeterminable, like intersex, but basically there's only two gametes towards which a body can be oriented towards producing, which is how sex is defined. Male and female, sperm and egg. The fact that there are more than two sexes or biological sex can change in clownfish doesn't tell us anything about humans. Just like the fact that birds can fly doesn't mean that humans can fly. Like, the logic isn't logicking for me, babe. I feel like I'm going crazy. The best defense of this little series is, I guess, that it's just totally not meant seriously and it's just entertainment. But the reason I did find it slightly frustrating was that it employs so many of the same logical fallacies that the anti-gay crowd has embraced for so long, when what they should really be doing is rejecting those premises. But counterproductive LGBT activism isn't exactly surprising or new these days. It's kind of sadly par for the course. Let me know what you think. Has clownfish existing changed your mind on two sexes existing in humans? Do you think Mother Nature is open-minded? Let me know. And now, we'll react to some LGBT TikToks in everybody's favorite part of the show, where I suffer and lose brain cells for your enjoyment. Make sure you're subscribed, and don't forget to hit that like button to reward me for my suffering. And now, let's get into it. Up first, this gay influencer wants us to just be more open-minded.
Here's a hot take. I don't think anyone should be able to tell someone else how they experience themselves. Somebody identifies with a gender you don't understand. That's tough. Sometimes life works like that. I don't speak French, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's not a real language.
So to me, this video is a good reminder that sometimes you can be so open-minded that your brain falls out. I mean, let's take this argument to its logical conclusion. If somebody identifies as a cat, are we just supposed to accept that? Because who are we to tell them that their gender is invalid? Are we supposed to start meowing at them? Am I supposed to offer them some catnip? Like, seriously, where does this logic end? If we just have to accept people's self-perception of themselves at all costs in any cases? But even then he misses the point, right? Because it's absolutely correct that you're free to perceive yourself however you want. But the leap he's making is that because you're free to do so, we have to accept it or engage with it. We don't. We're individuals with rational, logical thinking and the ability to critically examine things. And while you can identify as a cat if you want, a two-spirit penguin, knock yourself out all day. The problem becomes when you expect me to agree with you or affirm that when I don't. And in fact, if you really wanted to secure acceptance for transgender people, you would be gatekeeping the nonsense, my pronouns are slugs, or I identify as a cat, or whatever. You'd be gatekeeping that out and trying to explain that transgender people have a real medical experience and there's a basis for this. It's been observed for a long time and we should just treat them with respect. But instead, no, you're seriously arguing that people just need to accept anything and everything that people tell you about themselves. That's never going to happen, ever. So good luck on this sinking ship, my dude. Up next, the gay news from TikTok guy reshared one of his old videos and it annoyed me.
She just passed one of the most vile bills in the country.
I've truly never been prouder than I am today to call myself an Iowa girl.
They're so proud of themselves because they just banned trans girls from playing sports.
So the caption that this dude wrote on this is, "It's terrifying to see how far they've gone. They were the 11th state in the USA to do this when I made this video in 2022, but now, just 2 years later, half the country, 24 states, has done the same thing. It did not go the way he expected in the comments. This is amazing! Finally! Yes! I'm so happy! Well done! I'm so proud of them. That's amazing! Amazing! OMG, yes! I would be proud to be an Iowa girl too. Well done. Literally none of the comments agree with it. And this is TikTok, the wokest app of the woke. So my thoughts on this are that, look, it's common sense to have sports segregated by sex. And if that is the most vile bill you've ever seen, or one of them, you must not be very in touch with reality or politics or the world. And also, it's just factually untrue to claim that these states have banned trans girls from competing in sports. They have banned them or restricted them from competing in women's sports, but they are completely free to compete in the biological male category. If they were actually just being carte blanche booted out of sports, I would be totally against that. But that's not what's happening, and you just lied to your millions of followers. So good job, Joshy, Mr. Gay News. Up next, we've got an interesting video on what it's like to be non-binary.
So when it comes to the non-binary community, I think it can be really confusing because we get socialized believing that there's male and female, and with that there's masculine and feminine.
So non-binary can include people that feel like some are a bit male and a bit female. They can feel nothing, they can feel all of it. It can change. It's kind of just saying that like there is more than male or female. So for me as a non-binary person, I just feel more relaxed when people don't try and gender me at all.
So, we aren't socialized to believe that there's just male or female. That's just the facts of reality, of biology. And if you actually feel nothing inside, that's not like some cute new identity. Like, that's actually really sad. That's something you should, and I'm not being mean, like you should actually talk to somebody about and try to get to the bottom of. But I'd hope that you can heal from that, not embrace it as a new identity label. But again, you know, this is always my criticism of the non-binary crowd. Explain to me what it means to feel male or feel female without using crude sex stereotypes that aren't actually related to biological sex. You can't. You literally just can't. Because these people think that they're radical gender abolitionists, but they're literally just woke sexists, inadvertently reinforcing the same gender stereotypes they think they're rebelling against. It's okay to be a male who is very feminine in whatever that's supposed to mean. It's okay to be a female who's very masculine, whatever that's supposed to mean. It doesn't make you some third thing. It doesn't make you not male or not female, unless you buy into deeply regressive sex stereotypes, which I don't, and which I thought the progressives and the feminists were supposed to not either. But I'm wrong, at least insofar as these TikTok people are concerned. Up next, let's hear from a teacher who's considering telling their students all about their polyamory.
I pride myself on being a teacher who's very open about her life. And one of the things I'm very open about is my sexuality. I have a trans flag, a bi flag, a non-binary flag, all on my desk at my work.
All right, pause you right there, because that's kind of a red flag to me. I have no issue with gay or lesbian teachers being open about their family and who they are, if they have a wife or a husband, admitting that to their students, having a picture of them on their desk. I think that's totally fine. And no, it's not going to turn any of the kids gay or indoctrinate them or anything like that. Almost all my teachers had their heterosexual spouses and talked about their wives and their husbands, and it didn't work on me. However, putting political and ideological flags up around your classroom is a different story and not something a teacher should be doing, especially when it's incoherent nonsense like non-binary. Oh, but I guess I'll let her finish. Buckle up, because this is a long-winded one, shall we say.
But there's one thing I'm not open about, and it's being poly. And today that actually became something I had to worry about for the first time. See, the kids are interviewing us teachers as a part of learning how to write profiles on others. They'll soon be doing it with each other, but they're starting with the teachers so they can all work together on one subject. And one of the kids on Tuesday is going to ask me if I have a partner. And the answer is yeah. And I have another one too. And I don't know how to handle that conversation, because while I know that the kids are more accepting of things like homosexuality, bisexuality, all of that, polyamory is not in the conversation. It's not something that is talked about. And I worry not only would this be something that might lead to rumors that I am cheating on my partner or that I am a swinger or something like that.
So obviously it's not really cheating if it's an open relationship or a polyamorous relationship, and I do get that. And like being a swinger is different than what she's describing, but it's like not that different. So it's kind of funny to me that she's like, I wouldn't want them to think I'm a swinger. Like, babe, aren't you kind of though? I mean, not really, but it's just funny to me.
But would also just totally derail the class. So the obvious answer, the one that I went to first, is I'm not going to talk about it. But that feels wrong too. I don't like lying to my students. I don't like telling them falsehoods. And also, I don't feel comfortable answering the question by saying, yes, I have a partner, and having to pick which one I pick as the face for my relationship. That feels super, super gross, right? So I guess what tentatively I've decided after talking with my co-teachers and my assistant principal is maybe the right way to do it is answer the question honestly. Say, while I don't feel comfortable talking about who I'm in a relationship with in this specific setting, I will say that I am bisexual. I've dated people of many different genders. And if you're interested to talk about that or my own specific relationship, if you're really, really insistent, let's just not do it in the classroom setting, and we can do it like in lunch or in the after-school GSA club or something like that.
Or you could just not. Like, I do disagree with the right-wingers and conservatives who say, back in my day, teachers never talked about anything related to their family or their personal lives. Like, maybe that was your experience, but it's very common and normal for teachers to talk about that stuff, and kids are very curious and ask a lot of questions. But there is a level of discussing your personal life and going into detail about your sexual orientation that seems totally unnecessary here. And I can't help but notice that this teacher seems very centered around their wants, their needs, and their feelings, rather than what's best for the student, what's best for the purposes of the assignment. And I'm not saying that your rights and needs and wants and feelings are totally irrelevant as a teacher and as an individual, but you should be prioritizing the students. And it seems like you're just really hung up on yourself and your feelings.
Maybe it's a little bit more of an acceptable and understanding situation to bring this up. Now, this is a long rambling thing, and that story has kind of wrapped itself up neatly, or at least it will on Tuesday. But I think it talks to a much broader issue, which is that, like, this is a really nuanced thought process I had to have, where I had to consider the emotional maturity of the kids, where I had to consider what they already know and are talking about and what they don't know and aren't talking about, and also have to consider how does this fit in with the content that I'm teaching. And the fact of the matter is, this is not a conversation that conservatives are having at all. They've decided that blanket statement, like, you can't do this at all. There's no place for it. And that just shows such a lack of thought and care. They're not understanding their children as people and where they're at. They're not understanding the content that is necessary, and they're not reckoning with any kind of reality. Yeah, maybe like this is going to be an uncomfortable situation that may lead to some strange conversations, but that's part of being a person. And I'd rather have the kids be able to have those conversations in a safe place at school than on the internet where there's no one to make sure they're learning the right, respectful information.
So I sort of take the point, at least applied to some conservatives, that they lack the nuance that kids are curious and do ask about things, and just don't talk about your personal life as a blanket rule isn't going to cut it, is not going to work. It doesn't reflect the reality of working with kids or teaching. At the same time, this person's point about, well, I want them to learn good information, not from the internet or whatever. Well, babe, I'm going to be honest, given that you proudly display a non-binary flag in your classroom, I don't really trust you to be giving kids good information, because you've shown no problem peddling incoherent ideological nonsense, so what's to make us believe you wouldn't do the same? I wanted to share this video because it did make me think, and I do see nuances to this conversation, and I can't really wrap my head around exactly what to do with the polyamory situation. Well, I guess what I'd say is that the guiding principle along which you should decide is what's going to be best for the kids, not prioritizing your feelings. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed watching me lose brain cells for your entertainment. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of the Damage Control Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me and tuning in. It's been a blast as always, and we'll talk again next week.